The shortage of battery minerals and the really high prices that has created is a big story right now in the electric vehicle industry. And I'm going to talk to Dr. James Frith, who is a principal with Volta Energy Technologies, former head of energy storage analysis for BloombergNEF. So welcome to the interview, James.
Hey, Markham, great to be back. And yeah, a really interesting topic today.
Well, it is. It's fascinating because on the one hand, there's all sorts of angst within the industry and proponents of the energy transition worried about what this will do to batteries and the all of the industries like EV, transportation and stationary storage for power grids, that sort of thing. And on the other hand, I suspect that there's a tremendous amount of innovation going on behind the scenes to either increase the supply of these minerals or to engineer batteries so they use less of them. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, so I think both of those observations are correct. I think if we start on the first part around increasing supply, so I think one thing is very well known in the commodities industry, that when you have high prices, that stimulates investment in new supply. Now, when you're talking about mining raw materials, you obviously have to compete with the kind of long lead times that you can have on opening up a new mine, but often you'll find that there are some projects that are perhaps slightly earlier stage, but that are already underway, and those high prices can lead to investment flow into those projects and bring material online perhaps faster than was kind of previously expected. On the second point, again, this is a phenomenon that we've seen in the battery industry already. So I love using this as an example of going back to 2018 when we had very high cobalt prices. And the result of those high cobalt prices was that the battery industry moved to try and reduce the amount of cobalt in those batteries, in their batteries. And they did that successfully. They kind of transitioned quite quickly from NMC 111 to 622 in Europe, and then in China by 2020 we had NMC 811 batteries being used, and 811 would refer to kind of 8 parts nickel for every 1 part cobalt and 1 part manganese. So we've seen that previously, and I think that the result of the high prices that we see today will be the industry trying to reduce the amount of raw materials going into it, or particularly expensive raw materials going into these batteries. And there's a couple of ways that they could go about kind of achieving that. The first would be similar to what we saw in 2018, trying to change the ratio of materials in these batteries. The example that a lot of people are now very familiar with is switching from these nickel-based batteries to batteries that contain lithium, iron, and phosphate called LFP, which are much less dependent on resource-constrained materials. It's really just the lithium that's the issue. But there are also changes in the manufacturing process that are being developed today, and in some instances beginning to be introduced, that can help reduce our kind of the industry's demand for materials. And the one example I'll give there is something called pre-lithiation. So during the normal manufacturing of a lithium-ion battery, you have what's called a formation step. And during that formation step, you lose about 15% of the lithium within the battery. And traditionally typically that lithium comes from the cathode. But to put lithium in the cathode, you have to have the complete cathode material. So it's not just lithium, it's lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, or lithium, iron, phosphate, all of those materials. So if you lose 15% of that lithium, you're essentially isolating 15% of your cathode. And it means you have 15% material in there that is not being used and is kind of surplus to requirements. So by pre-lithiating batteries, typically by adding lithium to the anode before you manufacture it, you can utilize that additional material in there. So you end up with a higher energy density, and you therefore require fewer kilograms of material per kilowatt hour.
Yes, I've said it many times. The clever engineers that are working in the battery space right now is cause for considerable optimism. Now, I have and speaking of clever engineers, we've talked about, when we think about minerals for batteries, lithium and nickel and cobalt, we think of conventional mining. But there are startups, and I think of one that I've interviewed a number of times, and that's Amanda Hall and Summit Nanotech out of Calgary, Alberta, in Canada, where they have developed a carbon nanotechnology that essentially removes lithium from briny water. And they're already working down in Chile on this. And I mean, Amanda is convinced that this technology is going to, revolutionize how lithium is produced and the quantities and the prices that are available. And I just bring this up as an example of how innovation by startups or by existing companies is being brought to bear on these mineral shortages.
Yeah, so I think you're completely right there. There's a lot of innovation going on, particularly in the lithium mining space and for brines, where you have to pump a lot of water for brines, and inevitably you don't recover all of the lithium within that. But by using these extraction technologies, you're able to increase the lithium recovery rate for pumping the same kind of volume of water. But on top of that, you can also down in South America, by using these direct lithium extraction technologies, as they're referred to, you can essentially reduce the lead time from pumping water above ground to having your finished product. Because typically in the current kind of brine production, you put that brine through evaporation ponds, and it takes about anywhere from 18 months to 2 years to evaporate off the water and end up with your final product. So these DLE technologies can not only accelerate the rate of extraction, but they can also result in higher yields as well.
Just out of curiosity, how quickly, what's the timeline if you're using these new extraction technologies? Is it immediate? Is it days, the weeks, as opposed to, 18 months to 24 months to get your final product? I can see where that's a big constraint to increasing volumes and lowering prices.
Yeah, so it's a much faster process, and it varies depending on exactly which type of technology that you're looking at, but you're looking at kind of days to weeks rather than kind of months to years in this instance.
Well, let's talk about timelines here, James. So in the short term, we're having rising prices. And the last time I interviewed you, we were talking about how battery pack prices were falling quite a bit. So they were, in 2021, they were $132 per kilowatt hour. You thought that within a couple of years they would hit $100, and then by late 2020s they'd be down in the $60 to $80 range. Do the mineral shortages and high prices that we're seeing now change that timeline?
It certainly delays things in the near term. So the high prices of the raw materials is putting incredible pressure on the battery industry, and we've actually seen a number of companies now, both battery manufacturers and electric vehicle manufacturers, increasing the price of their products as a result and passing those higher prices through to end customers. So there's certainly going to be a change in the near term, and it looks likely that in 2022 it'll be the first year that we see battery pack prices on average across the industry rising instead of falling. And as things stand today, with raw material shortages, but also continued disruption to supply chains as a result of COVID, it looks likely that 2023, as well as perhaps 2024, will see elevated prices in the battery industry. Now, the caveat here is that although there'll be these higher prices in the next 2 or 3 years, once raw material prices fall, they'll be combined with the other innovations that we've seen within the battery industry. And so when prices start to relax again, we'll see a very rapid decline in battery pack and cell prices back towards the trajectory where we would expect them to be. So initially we were looking at kind of $100 per kilowatt hour in, say, 2024. We probably won't get there in 2024, but we might find that in 2025 or 2026, you drop quite quickly below that mark and back to where we would expect to be in the kind of $85 to $90 per kilowatt hour range.
Interesting. I have one final question for you, James. Elon Musk has been speculating about, that Tesla might get into the lithium mining industry because it wants to firm up control over its supply chain. And I'm wondering, do you think he will do that, or will Tesla do that? And are other automakers or battery manufacturers looking at following that lead?
So I think certainly from the perspective of an automaker or battery manufacturer, it makes sense to some extent be invested in the mining process. Perhaps not all of the material that you need, but if you have some of your supply coming from a mine that you own or kind of help to operate, you know how much material you'll be getting, and you know the price that you're going to be paying for it. So you wouldn't necessarily take 100% of your material from it, but it will give you a little bit of certainty over future pricing and will act as a hedge against future price rises. So I think it's very possible that we will see Tesla doing this, and they're not alone in kind of expressing this desire. If I remember correctly, GM has invested or is talking about investing in a geothermal brine in the US, and similarly Stellantis is looking to invest in geothermal brines within Europe. So we are seeing automakers taking stakes, if not outright kind of buying some of these raw material resources.
Well, James, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Markham.